For 3 years, I believed that if I stayed quiet enough, careful enough, small enough, my marriage would stay intact. I learned how to measure my words before speaking them, how to read the temperature of a room before opening my mouth, how to smile even when my stomach was tight with worry. When my husband, Ethan, invited his father over for dinner at our home in Charlotte, I saw it as an opportunity. William Carter wasn't just his father, he was the man Ethan admired most. A retired judge, disciplined, respected, controlled. If anyone could make Ethan see me differently, it was him. So I set the table perfectly. Candles straight, wine breathing, roast time to the minute. I told myself that tonight would be calm, predictable, safe. I didn't know that before the night was over, a single moment would expose everything, and the person I feared most would be the one demanding answers. William Carter arrived exactly at 6:30. Of course he did. Ethan respected punctuality, the way some people respected religion, and his father had taught him that. When the doorbell rang, Ethan straightened his blazer and looked at me. "Remember," he said quietly, adjusting his cufflinks. "Just relax. Don't overdo it." I nodded. I never knew what overdoing it meant. Talking too much? Smiling too brightly? Breathing too loudly? I opened the door. "Mr. Carter," I said warmly. He gave me a polite nod. "Mia, thank you for having me." His presence filled the entryway. Tall, silver-haired, composed, even retired. He carried himself like he was walking into a courtroom instead of his son's house. Ethan stepped forward quickly. "Dad, good to see you." They hugged briefly, firm, restrained, affection measured. I stepped aside to let them in. The house smelled like rosemary and garlic. Soft jazz played in the background, low enough not to interrupt conversation. The table was set with our best dishes. Not too formal, not too casual. I had rehearsed this. Dinner began smoothly. Ethan poured wine. William complimented the house. I asked thoughtful questions about his recent charity board meeting. I laughed at the right moments. For a while, I almost forgot to be afraid of making a mistake. "So, Mia," William said midway through dinner, folding his napkin neatly in his lap. "Ethan tells me you're working with the Charlotte Community Outreach Center." I glanced at Ethan. He smiled, but it was tight. "Yes," I said carefully. "I coordinate educational programs for women re-entering the workforce." William's eyebrows lifted slightly. "That's admirable work." Before I could respond, Ethan chuckled lightly. "She's very passionate about it." There was something in his tone I couldn't quite name. Pride? Possession? Warning? "It keeps her busy," he added. I focused on my plate. "I enjoy it," I said softly. William looked between us, studying something I couldn't see. Ethan reached across the table and refilled his father's glass before it was half empty. "Dad always says structure is important," Ethan continued. "Discipline builds character." William nodded once. "It does." There was a pause. Then William turned to me again. "And how are you finding married life these days?" The question felt simple, but my heart skipped. "Good," I answered automatically. Ethan's hand rested on my knee under the table. His grip was firm, not painful, but deliberate. I kept smiling. "Marriage requires effort," I added. "From both people." William held my gaze a moment longer than expected. "Yes," he said slowly. "It does." The roast was perfect. The conversation stayed polite. No raised voices, no tension visible from the outside. Anyone watching would have seen a successful young couple hosting a respected father. Anyone watching would have thought everything was fine. But I knew better. Because perfection wasn't peace. It was performance. And performances end. Dessert was where everything began to tilt. I brought out the apple tart I had baked that afternoon. The crust brushed lightly with honey so it would shine under the dining room lights. I had even practiced slicing it neatly so each piece would look identical. Perfection mattered to Ethan. Details mattered. I placed the plates down carefully. And then I saw it. The plates were cold. I had forgotten to warm them. It was such a small thing, something most people would never notice. But I noticed the moment Ethan did. His smile didn't disappear. It tightened. "Mia," he said lightly, almost playfully. "Did you forget something?" My stomach dropped. I can fix it," I said quickly. "It'll only take a minute." William looked at the plates, then at his son. "It's just dessert," he said calmly. Ethan laughed under his breath. It's about standards, Dad. He stood up slowly, adjusting his sleeves like he was preparing to make a point rather than solve a problem. You know how we talked about this, he continued, turning toward me. Presentation matters. I know, I whispered. I'm sorry. I reached for the plates. His hand caught my wrist midair. Not violently, just enough to stop me. The gesture was subtle, but firm. William's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Ethan leaned closer to me, lowering his voice so it sounded intimate rather than tense. You always rush, he murmured. You never think things through. I was focused on timing, I replied softly. You were careless. The word hung there. Careless. It was a word he used often. Careless with details. Careless with money. Careless with how I represented him. William set his fork down slowly. Ethan, he said evenly. She prepared the entire meal. Let it go. Ethan straightened. I'm not upset, he insisted, though his jaw was tight. I'm just asking for basic effort. My cheeks felt warm. Not from embarrassment alone, but from the familiar tension building beneath the surface. Dad believes in accountability, Ethan continued, almost smiling. Don't you? William's expression didn't change. I believe in proportion, he replied. The air shifted. Ethan's eyes flicked toward his father, calculating. For a brief second, I saw uncertainty there. Then he turned back to me. You embarrassed me, he said quietly. The words weren't loud, but they were sharp. I didn't mean to, I answered. And in that moment, standing between apology and defense, I realized something terrifying. Ethan wasn't reacting to the plates. He was reacting to being corrected. In front of his father. And whatever came next wasn't about dessert at all. The silence after Ethan said, You embarrassed me, felt heavier than the air in the room. I could feel William watching us. Not speaking. Observing. Ethan stepped closer. Not aggressively, just close enough that I could feel the tension radiating from him. I asked for one simple thing, he said, his voice low and controlled. One. I said I'm sorry, I replied, trying to keep my tone even. I'll warm the plates. That's not the point. It never was. The point was control. The point was who held it. William cleared his throat slightly. Ethan. But Ethan didn't look at him. He looked at me. And then in one sharp, sudden movement, his hand came up and struck my face. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't prolonged. It wasn't chaotic. It was quick, calculated, just enough to silence me. The sound echoed louder than it should have in the dining room. For a split second, I couldn't process what had happened. Not because I had never felt that before, but because it had never happened like this. Not in front of someone else. Not in front of the one person whose approval Ethan valued above everything. My cheek burned. But what hurt more was the exposure. The curtain had been pulled back, and there was no way to pretend anymore. I braced myself for the familiar script. Minimization. A joke. A comment about marital disagreements. A dismissal. Ethan lowered his hand slowly, as if he were just finishing a gesture mid-conversation. She overreacts, he said lightly. You know how she is. The room was still. William didn't move immediately. He didn't rush to me. He didn't shout. He simply stood, slowly, deliberately. And when he spoke, his voice wasn't loud. It was precise. Ethan. Just my husband's name. But it landed harder than anything else had that night. Ethan turned, irritation flickering across his face. Dad, it's fine. Don't make it into something. What? William said carefully. Did you just do? The question hung there. Not emotional. Not panicked. Measured. Ethan blinked. It was nothing. William took one step forward. It was not nothing. The authority in his tone changed the entire temperature of the room. For the first time since I'd married Ethan, I saw him hesitate. Truly hesitate. Because this wasn't a private correction. It wasn't something he could smooth over with charm. It had a witness. And not just any witness. A judge. His judge. William's eyes shifted to me. Mia, he said calmly. Are you all right? No one had asked me that before. Not like that. Not without blame hidden inside the question. I opened my mouth, but the words didn't come. Because for the first time, I wasn't being asked to apologize. I was being asked to answer. I had imagined many scenarios in my head over the years. William ignoring it. William laughing it off. William telling me to be more understanding. What I had never imagined was this. A room that suddenly felt like a courtroom. Ethan shifted his weight, irritation flashing across his face. "Dad, don't dramatize this," he said. It was a reflex. "She knows that." William didn't even look at him. He kept his eyes on me. "Mia," he repeated, steady and composed. "Are you all right?" My cheek still burned, but that wasn't what made my voice shake. "I'm fine," I said automatically. Ethan exhaled sharply. "See? It's fine." William's head tilted slightly. "That is not what I asked," he replied. The authority in his voice changed everything. Not loud, not explosive, just absolute. He turned to his son. "What prompted that action?" Ethan crossed his arms. Defensive. "She embarrassed me. By serving dessert?" "It's not about dessert." "Then explain it." The silence stretched. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "You don't understand how she is, Dad. She pushes, she provokes. She does things carelessly and then acts innocent." William listened without interrupting. When Ethan finished, he spoke calmly. "Did she threaten you?" "No." "Did she insult you?" "No." "Did she endanger anyone?" "Of course not." "Then," William said evenly, "why did you feel entitled to respond with force?" The word force felt deliberate, clinical, precise. Ethan's jaw tightened. "It wasn't force. It was a correction." My breath caught. Correction. William's expression shifted not to anger, but to something colder. "You are not her instructor," he said quietly. "You are her husband." Ethan scoffed. "Dad, you're overreacting." William took a step closer. "I spent 3 decades on the bench listening to men explain why their loss of control was justified. I have heard every variation of this argument." He looked at me again. "Mia, I need you to answer honestly. Has this happened before?" My chest felt tight. Ethan's voice cut in quickly. "Don't exaggerate." William raised his hand without looking at him. "Sit down." Ethan froze. For a moment, I thought he might argue. But he didn't. He sat. Slowly. William walked around the table and stood a few feet away from me, not touching, not crowding, just present. "You are not in trouble," he said gently. "You are not responsible for his behavior. I need to know whether this is a pattern." The word pattern made something inside me crack. Because patterns don't happen once. Patterns repeat. I swallowed. "Yes," I whispered. The word felt like a confession. Ethan stood up again. "This is ridiculous." William's voice rose slightly, not shouting but unmistakably firm. "Enough." The room went silent. Ethan looked smaller somehow, less confident, less certain. William turned fully toward him now. "You will not speak over her again." The authority in that sentence wasn't fatherly. It was judicial, measured, unmovable. Then he asked the question that shifted everything from family tension to something far more serious. "How long?" The air felt heavy. I looked at Ethan. He looked back at me, not apologetic, not ashamed. Warning, but something had changed. For years, silence had protected him. Tonight, silence had a witness. 3 years, I said quietly. The words settled over the room like a verdict. Ethan's composure finally cracked. "You're twisting this," he snapped. "You always twist things." William didn't blink. 3 years, he repeated, almost to himself. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, not for anger, not for intimidation, for his phone, and in that moment I realized the evening wasn't spiraling. It was shifting, from private harm to public accountability. When William took out his phone, Ethan's voice sharpened immediately. "What are you doing?" he demanded. William didn't answer right away. He unlocked the screen calmly, as if he were checking the time. "Mia," he said without looking at his son, "I'm going to ask you something very clearly. You may answer without fear. Are you afraid of him?" The question made my pulse pound in my ears. Ethan let out a short laugh. "Dad, this is insane." William finally turned to him. "What is insane?" he said quietly, "is believing that fear has no consequences." He faced me again. "Mia, are you afraid?" For years, I had rephrased that question in my head. Am I careful? Am I anxious? Am I walking on eggshells? But fear? That word felt too honest, too undeniable. "Yes," I said. The room changed. Ethan's face drained of color. "You're being dramatic." William's expression hardened. "I have seen dramatic," he said evenly. This is not that. He stepped back slightly, giving me space rather than closing it. Mia, has he ever restricted your access to money? Ethan's head snapped toward me. You don't need to answer that. William's tone cut through the interruption. You will not instruct her again. I felt my hands tremble. Yes, I said quietly. He manages everything. Do you have independent access to funds? No. Has he ever discouraged you from seeing friends or family? Yes. Ethan slammed his palm against the table. This is a private marriage. William didn't flinch. No, he said firmly. It ceased to be private the moment intimidation entered it. He turned to his son fully now. You are confusing authority with control. I am her husband, Ethan shot back. And she is not your subordinate. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before. William looked at me again, softer this time. Mia, would you like assistance leaving tonight? The simplicity of the question undid me. Not should you leave. Not, why didn't you leave sooner? Would you like assistance? It implied choice. For the first time in years, Ethan's voice dropped lower, more urgent. You walk out that door, don't come back. William answered before I could. That is not your decision. Ethan stared at him, disbelief etched across his face. You're choosing her over your own son? William's voice was calm but resolute. I am choosing accountability. Then he did something that left Ethan completely speechless. He dialed a number. Not the police first. A colleague. A senior attorney he had worked with for decades. He stepped aside, speaking in measured tones. Yes. I need immediate legal guidance regarding a domestic matter. Yes, tonight. Ethan paced now, agitation replacing confidence. You can't be serious. William ended the call and looked directly at him. I am entirely serious. Then he made the second call, this one shorter, more procedural, reporting what had occurred, not with drama, not with anger, with facts. When he finished, he turned to me again. You will not remain here tonight. It wasn't a command. It was protection. Ethan shook his head. You're ruining my life. William's reply was devastating in its simplicity. No, your choices did that. A knock came at the door 20 minutes later. Officers entered quietly, professional, composed. Statements were taken separately. Documentation began. There were no raised voices anymore. No performances. Just records, evidence, process. And as I stood there, answering questions I never thought I would answer aloud, I realized something profound. The most powerful moment of the night wasn't the confrontation. It wasn't the slap. It was the refusal to look away. William had not exploded. He had not defended me with violence. He had done something far more powerful. He had drawn a line. And once that line was drawn, there was no crossing back over it. I didn't pack much. Just a small suitcase. A few clothes, my laptop, my documents. William stood in the hallway while I moved quietly through the bedroom. He didn't rush me. He didn't hover. He simply made sure Ethan stayed in the living room, speaking with one of the officers. The house felt unfamiliar now, like I was walking through a place that had belonged to someone else's life. When I stepped outside, the air felt different, cooler, sharper. Freedom doesn't always feel triumphant. Sometimes it feels terrifying. William drove me to his home across town, a quiet, well-kept neighborhood where everything looked orderly and intentional. The kind of place where stability felt built into the sidewalks. He carried my suitcase inside without comment. You may stay as long as you need, he said simply. No conditions. No lectures. Just a statement. The next morning began the part I had always feared most, the legal reality. Protective measures were filed immediately. William connected me with a family law attorney in Charlotte who specialized in domestic abuse cases and victim advocacy. Her name was Laura Mitchell, and she was calm, focused, and reassuring. You have options, she told me in her office 2 days later. More than you realize. Options. I had forgotten that word existed in my vocabulary. We discussed restraining orders, financial disclosures, temporary separation agreements, counseling referrals, documentation. Everything felt clinical, structured, safe. Ethan attempted to call repeatedly. I didn't answer. He left messages that swung wildly between apology and accusation. You're blowing this out of proportion. You embarrassed me in front of my father. I'll fix this. You owe me a conversation. Laura instructed me to save every message. Patterns matter, she said. I began learning about financial rights within marriage, how joint accounts functioned, how assets were divided, how intimidation could legally impact settlements. William never interfered in strategy. He attended meetings only when I asked. In court filings, he provided a sworn statement as a witness, under oath, against his own son. I observed behavior inconsistent with mutual respect. He testified in preliminary hearings, and I will not excuse it. Hearing those words spoken publicly felt like validation I didn't know I needed. Ethan's attorney attempted to minimize everything: momentary lapse in judgment, miscommunication, exaggeration. But documentation exists for a reason. Witnesses exist for a reason. Protective laws exist for a reason. The temporary order was granted within weeks. The house was no longer solely his territory. He was instructed to remain at a distance. For the first time in 3 years, I slept without rehearsing explanations in my head. Therapy became part of my routine. At first, I resisted it. "I'm not broken," I told my counselor. "No," she replied gently. "You're healing. There's a difference." William checked in occasionally, never prying. One evening, about a month after I moved in, he knocked lightly on the guest room door. "May I come in?" I nodded. He stood by the window for a moment before speaking. "I regret not seeing it sooner," he said quietly. His voice didn't carry guilt for reputation. It carried responsibility. "I taught Ethan discipline," he continued. "But discipline without empathy becomes control. That is on me." I had expected defense. What I got was reflection. "I don't blame you," I told him. He gave a small nod. Accountability does not require blame. It requires acknowledgement. The divorce proceedings began formally 2 months later. There were negotiations. Attempts at settlement. Moments when Ethan tried to appear reasonable. But something fundamental had changed. I wasn't negotiating from fear anymore. I was negotiating from clarity. 8 months after that dinner, the divorce was finalized. Financial arrangements were fair. Legal protections were in place. And I walked out of the courthouse not victorious, but steady. The chaos had been replaced by structure. The intimidation replaced by law. And the silence replaced by something far stronger: my voice. The first night I moved into my own place, I sat on the living room floor with nothing but a lamp, a folding chair, and a quiet I didn't recognize. It wasn't tense. It wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. It was just still. The townhouse was small, 2 bedrooms, narrow staircase, a kitchen that barely fit a table, but it was mine. Every choice inside, it was mine. The pale blue paint on the walls, the secondhand couch, the slightly crooked bookshelf I assembled myself. For weeks, I kept expecting a correction. "You should have picked something better. That color doesn't work. Why would you arrange it like that?" But no voice came, only silence. And slowly, that silence became peace. I returned to my job at the nonprofit full-time. The Charlotte Community Outreach Center felt different now. I wasn't just coordinating workshops anymore. I was listening with new ears. Women came in with resumes in hand and uncertainty in their eyes. Some were rebuilding after job loss, some after divorce, some after far worse things they didn't always name out loud. I recognized the way they hesitated before answering certain questions. I recognized the careful phrasing, the self-blame hidden between sentences. One afternoon, during a small career coaching session, a woman named Alyssa paused mid-sentence and said quietly, "I just want to feel safe again." The room went still. I knew that sentence. I had lived inside it. After the session, I approached my supervisor. "I'd like to expand our programming," I said. "Legal literacy workshops, financial independence training, sessions specifically about recognizing coercive control." She studied me carefully. "Personal reason?" I nodded. "Approved," she said simply. "Rebuilding isn't dramatic. It doesn't happen in a single moment. It's repetitive. You wake up, you choose yourself, you do it again." William continued to call every Sunday evening. At first, the conversations were formal. "How was your week? Are the legal matters progressing smoothly?" Over time, they softened. He told me stories from his years on the bench, cases that haunted him, decisions that changed him. He spoke about accountability not as punishment, but as restoration of balance. One evening, he said something that stayed with me. Family, he said slowly, is not loyalty to wrongdoing. It is loyalty to integrity. I wrote that sentence down. Ethan attempted contact twice during the separation period. Messages routed through attorneys, requests for private closure conversations. Both were declined. Boundaries, I learned, are not cruelty, they are clarity. Therapy helped me untangle something else too. Guilt. Not guilt for leaving. Guilt for staying so long. You survived the way you knew how, my therapist said. Survival strategies are not weaknesses. That reframed everything. About a year after the divorce, I started volunteering at a women's legal aid center in uptown Charlotte on weekends. Not as a victim, not as a spokesperson, just as someone who understood. I didn't tell my story publicly. Not yet. But when a woman hesitated before signing protective paperwork and whispered, "What if I'm overreacting?" I knew how to answer. "You're allowed to take yourself seriously," I told her. One evening, after a long volunteer shift, I stepped outside the center and realized something unexpected. I wasn't looking over my shoulder anymore. I wasn't rehearsing explanations. I wasn't shrinking. I was walking upright, not because I had become fearless, but because fear no longer controlled my decisions. Rebuilding didn't make me stronger overnight. It made me aware. Aware that control, disguised as love, is not love. Aware that silence protects harm more than it protects peace. Aware that one person refusing to look away can change the trajectory of an entire life. And perhaps most importantly, aware that I had never been weak, just unheard, until someone finally demanded answers. 2 years after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Ethan by accident. It happened at a grocery store on a Tuesday evening, fluorescent lights, soft music, nothing dramatic. For a split second, my body reacted before my mind did. My shoulders tightened, my breath shortened. Old habits. But then I remembered something important. There was a legal order in place. There were boundaries established. There was documentation. And I wasn't alone anymore. He saw me too. There was no anger in his face, just something hollow. He didn't approach. He didn't speak. He turned down another aisle. And that was it. No confrontation. No scene. No intimidation. Accountability had done what emotion alone never could. It had created distance. When I told William about it that Sunday, he was quiet for a moment. "And how did you feel?" he asked. "Calm," I said honestly. For the first time, he let out a soft breath. "That," he replied, "is justice doing its job." Over time, my work at the nonprofit expanded. The legal literacy workshops grew into a full program. We partnered with family law attorneys, financial planners, therapists. We called it the Clarity Project, because clarity is often the first step toward freedom. Eventually, I did begin sharing my story, not in detail, not sensationally, but strategically. In small groups. In training sessions. In conversations with women who thought they were overreacting. I told them what someone once told me. "You are allowed to take yourself seriously." I didn't frame it as survival. I framed it as standards. Respect is a standard. Safety is a standard. Autonomy is a standard. William attended one of our fundraising events the following spring. He stood quietly in the back of the room while I spoke at the podium. Afterward, he approached me. "I'm proud of you," he said. It wasn't a dramatic moment, but it meant something. Not because I needed his approval, but because it confirmed something deeper. Integrity had prevailed over loyalty, and that mattered. 3 years ago, I believed silence kept peace. Now, I understand something different. Silence keeps patterns intact. Accountability breaks them. What happened that night at dinner wasn't just exposure, it was interruption. An interruption of a cycle that could have continued quietly for years. Not everyone has a witness step forward. Not everyone has someone with authority demand answers. But everyone deserves protection. Everyone deserves the law on their side. Everyone deserves the chance to choose themselves. Today, I wake up in a home that feels steady. I make decisions without rehearsing them. I speak without calculating consequences. Peace, I've learned, is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of respect. And if there is one thing I know now, it is this. Love does not require fear. Family does not require silence. And strength isn't loud. Sometimes it sounds like a calm voice in a quiet room saying, What did you just do? And refusing to let the answer disappear.